Alan, it's Christmas Eve, and I'm very happy to be here. Can you, thanks for inviting me to this. Can
Thank you.
tell me a little bit, tell everyone a little bit about you? And then I'll have a ton of questions to ask you about private equity and being an interim CMO. And
Sure. Hello, Dean. Nice to see you again.
thank you.
And so I'm Alan Gonsenhauser. My company is called Demand Revenue. It's at demandrevenue.com.
Mm-hmm.
And a little bit about me. So I've been a CMO now 11 times, 7 full-time companies and 4 with private equity portfolio companies in the last almost 4 years now.
Right.
And so what I do since I went independent in February 2021 is I am a CMO coach, advisor, and mentor.
Mm-hmm.
As I was at Serious Decisions in Forrester over my 6 years there, I mentored over 130 CMOs and learned that I really like doing that, advising and helping them with their companies and their careers. So I mentor CMOs. I can come on as an interim CMO. I help with projects, either chief marketing officers or chief customer officers. I've helped a couple companies implement Net Promoter Score 3.0, the new version, according to the person who started it.
Mm-hmm.
And most of my clients are portfolio companies of private equity firms, generally mid-market, I'd say 200 million into the billions. And the industries are health technology, SaaS software, HR tech, fintech, now cybersecurity, data and migrations,
Right.
but a variety of tech type and SaaS software type companies. And love what I do and love being independent.
All right. So let's jump into this then. A private equity company buys some company. It's therefore, until they ever sell it again, called a portfolio company.
Yep.
Right. Or sometimes you see it as a portco,
Right.
as the abbreviation. All right. So you get brought in, let's say, as an interim CMO, like the CMO they had, the portco had is gone. You're going to be there for some number of months, maybe until, or quarters, until they like fully vet and bring on maybe a full-time CMO.
Right.
And then you're on to the next one. Right. So walk me through what the first 90 days look like at a portfolio company. Like, how do you figure out what's broken and what to fix first, like the priority for that kind of stuff? Like, or if you want, just tell me about the last time you did this.
Well, I've been an interim CMO 4 times in the last 4 years and done a lot of other things. But, first thing is developing relationships with a marketing team, with a C-suite. Because when I come on as interim CMO and I do that type of work, I join the executive leadership team. And so cross-functional alignment is really critical. Yeah. So, and I tend to work really, really well with CFOs since I started in finance and moved to marketing in my career. But it's developing relationships with each of my C-suite peers and developing relationships with the marketing team, building trust, and not coming on like a ton of bricks, like I know what the answers are, because I need to learn. Right. So it's coming on board and becoming them, learning their business, learning their products, learning their, how marketing is done at the company. And when I do that, generally it's, figuring out what their strengths and gaps are, because there are always strengths and gaps. And what I start with generally is an analysis of their infrastructure. And when I talk about infrastructure, I'm talking about people, process, technology, data, analytics, pricing, and their brand strength. So I look at those types of things and I look for strengths and gaps. And then I pivot from doing that to developing a short-term and a long-term mitigation plan that I get approved with the C-suite and the board and the CFO generally.
Okay. And
that's what I do in a nutshell when I start.
So I guess you develop over time kind of an eye for like what to fix first or what's clearly broken.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough then. In that case, I mean,
and what the strengths are too, because there are always strengths that companies have. But there are usually things that are broken also.
Right. Well, I imagine you're not brought in if everything's going fantastically great, right? That wouldn't make any sense. And so, like, I'm sure that the PE firm and even the portfolio company, right? They're looking for quick wins, and they're also looking for like long term sort of sustainable gains, right? So,
Yeah.
like, how does that happen? How do you deliver that? Is that even possible on an
Well,
interim basis?
let me give you a couple of
Yeah.
examples. You know, especially in high tech, there's a sea of sameness
Yeah.
in terms of brands. So I try to understand pretty quickly, what the brand is. And is it a house of brands where they've done a lot of mergers and acquisitions and they have a whole
Right.
bunch of, brand names that they need to bring together? Have they built the brand of the company? And is it really clear what they do? Sometimes it isn't. I'll give you one example. When I first became interim CMO at a company called nThrive, that's now FinThrive.
Mhm.
They're now a 400 million revenue cycle management company, and they've done some acquisitions. But when I first arrived there, and I looked at their creative and how they articulated their brand, they had happy people standing on a very nice beach. And so when I saw that, and I knew what business they were in, they're in the health technology business. I asked, um, do we sell drugs? Are we a pharma company? Do we sell mental health? No, we're a revenue cycle management company. We help companies be more productive in how they document and articulate everything from the time someone goes to a hospital and is seen by a doc or a department, and how they get paid by the payers. And so the creative and how they articulated what they did had nothing to do with their real business. So that's one of the first things we fixed on an interim basis, and that was a quick win. And the name nThrive, I said, what does N
Mhm.
stand for? And they told me, to the nth degree. I said,
Mm.
really? How would anybody know that? What does that really mean? So we then we rebranded with an agency and everything else, and eventually they became FinThrive, which makes more sense because
Right.
financial and Thrive, they're a healthcare company that helps um, hospital systems get paid, more efficiently, more effectively, etc. So that's one example. And there were a bunch of things that they needed to rebuild the demand infrastructure and the marketing technology stack. So I brought in a vendor to help with that. It really helped. And when I come on board, what I generally say is I provide three things: leadership, strategy, and my network. I have a lot of folks in my network that I can bring on to help
Right.
with certain things. Does that help, Dean?
That's a big deal, I guess, right? A lot of fractional CMOs and interim CMOs, like one of the main things they show up with in their pocket is, they have an SEO person, they have a graphics person, they have an agency, right? And the people that they've worked with before. And so they can sort
Yeah.
of bring that to a client. All right, that makes sense. Oh, by the way, I just realized if nThrive was spelled the word thrive with the N in it, then technically it is NTH and thrive. And they're just double using the TH.
Well, someone like you would notice that, being a writer, Dean.
Someone like me would
I'm
notice
not
that. Yes.
surprised.
I'm not saying I recommend that approach, but yeah, okay, that makes more
It's
sense.
just I didn't know what it meant, and I
Yeah.
don't think anybody else did
No,
either. So
even
yeah,
then, I
those
don't
are
know
some of
what
the
it means. It doesn't mean
sorry.
anything.
Well,
All
plus
right, fair
happy
enough.
people on a beach had nothing to do with their business. Had
Yeah,
nothing to do
I
with
mean, in all fairness, there are no happier actors in any TV commercials than the ones in pharmaceutical ads.
I
By the
think
end of the ad, they're ecstatic about their lives.
yeah,
They're living their positive future, buddy.
they are. Yeah.
All right, so a lot of companies, I'm going to be blunt here, a lot of companies love their products or services more than they love their customers.
Yeah.
Right, and they
That's a
spend way
shame.
more time sort of dwelling and nurturing their product and trying to figure out what they want to say to the world instead of figuring out what a customer wants to hear.
Yes.
Like, how do you flip that around?
I love doing that. I call that product to audience transformations.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll give you another example. A company called Precisely, which
Mhm.
is about 900 million
Wow.
software and data company. That was also one of my first clients. also PE owned, like nThrive and FinThrive.
Right.
They had they had done a lot of mergers and acquisitions, over 20 of them, and they had like 16 product areas. And what they were doing is each of the product areas were transmitting what I call selfies. You know,
Right.
here are the features, and here are the features of our product. Here's why you need it. And what I got them to realize is across these 16 product areas, they had maybe 3 common personas or target audiences that they were really selling to. So what I convinced marketing, and actually the whole company, to do this got to the CEO and sales and everybody else, is to develop what we called strategic growth plays to those 3 personas. So instead of shooting rockets out 16 times and confusing customers, we grouped and consolidated those into 3 different campaigns with 3 personas or target audiences, and talked about what the pain points were of the customers or prospects that would be interested in those products, and started with their pain points and the jobs they were trying to get done, and then brought that back to the products that the companies had, that the company could offer for each of their personas. And that was a lot more effective, and huge results from that. But that's an example of, you know, what I see in a lot of companies is that they transmit product selfies.
Yeah.
And that's not what the customer wants to hear. They want to hear about the jobs that they need to get done, the difficulties or pain points with those jobs, and how a vendor that can help them with what they're trying to do. So it's kind of outside in thinking versus inside out.
I have a very rude way to put that, and I'm not going to say it. But I do have this, okay? Most customers, most companies think they know their customers.
Yeah.
You and I know they don't, right? How do you help them like really understand what makes that customer tick when it comes to this company's products or services?
You know, and some know better than others, but, you know, most companies, around 90%, really, you know, are not great at serving customers the way they want to be served. And we know how we all want to be served. What I found again and again across many companies is the 20-year-old Net Promoter Score system. It's been updated to NPS 3.0 with new metric and everything else, is a really powerful system if it's implemented correctly.
Yeah.
A lot of companies kind of bastardize it and say, oh yeah, you know, and they care more about the score than what customers are telling them and how to improve the score. And it's a great metric because you can trifurcate it, if that's a word, into the promoters, the 9s and 10s,
right,
that love your brand and find out what they love about what you offer and why you're a great fit. The 6s and 7s that are kind of passives in the middle are kind of not huge promoters or very negative, but you can find out what it would take to make them a promoter. And then the 0s through 6s that are detractors that really have an issue, and you can find out what their issues are and which are controllable and what you can do about it. I just did a case study with FinThrive where I worked with the chief customer officer and his team and marketing to fix that, which just came out a couple months ago. But that data is very, very powerful, and it has a huge impact on your churn and retention and the types of KPIs that are correlated with your future financial success. And I think more companies need to realize that and really listen to their customers. And then once they listen, do something. And once they do something, communicate what they did, and then listen again to make sure it stuck and it made an improvement.
Okay, let's talk about tech and tools for a little bit. You know, love that. You walk in, unless your experience is very different than when I walk into even large clients, right? Their tech stack really doesn't work right. Like things are not talking to each other. I mean, their marketing and even sales or CRM, like tech stack, right? Like, do you ever get involved in cleaning up that kind of mess? Right, and so it actually drives revenue.
I can be dangerous with tech stacks, but I'm not the fingers on the keyboard to fix it. But I know people who are excellent at doing so. So I have I have several vendors that I've brought in where I see the tech stack and the demand processes need to be rebuilt, and they've done a very excellent job at doing that. So I can spot as part of looking at the marketing infrastructure, people, process, technology, which is the MarTech and the sales tech stack. I can spot when that's an issue. Oftentimes, when there's a lot of merger and acquisition and a lot of Salesforce instances, that creates a problem. But I bring in vendors to help with that.
Yeah, incorporate my people collect companies. A lot of companies collect companies. At one point, a very famous company like Comcast, they were a client of the company that I worked for when I was back in corporate. They had at one point, someone told me, close to 100 different billing systems because they had just like sucked it all in from other companies as they bought them. And I mean, the effort to standardize on 3 or 4 systems was immense. All right, let's talk about data and decisions for a second. All right, numbers matter, obviously. Is it hard to get companies to make marketing decisions based on data instead of like what they know, gut feeling, or is that normally not much of an issue at all? And while you're talking about that, what data, or rather, what numbers do you like to keep an eye on?
Yeah, so depends on the company culture. I mean, some companies, the C-suite, they think they know what customers want and make emotional rather than database decisions. I think that's one potential issue. Another big issue I see over and over again, especially with private equity owned portfolio companies, is a lot of dirty data.
Yeah.
Let me say that again. A lot of filthy data that hasn't been cleaned up. It hasn't been deduped. It hasn't been normalized between different systems and Salesforce instances and and acquisitions they've done. So in order to fix that, you need to make data quality a thing. And making it a thing means you need to resource it. You need to make the effort to clean it, to dedupe it, to normalize it, to make sure the data is quality enough to be able to make decisions on it. And then once you've done that, and that's a very important thing to do, and a lot of companies need to do that, then you need to define what good looks like in a cross-functional way. So sales, product, finance, marketing all agree, and revenue ops, if you have that in your company, all agree on what the right metrics are and how to drive them, and are very transparent about what's working and what isn't. Because that's the only way to really improve. I mean, it's not the number, it's what you do with the numbers to improve. It's like Net Promoter Score I was talking about, or anything else. You have to define what good looks like and constantly, pick the few metrics that you can influence and where you can make the numbers talk and make decisions based on the data.
All right, let's talk about. Well, that leads me to the next question, which is the people who are going to be involved in the data, collecting it, looking at it, analyzing it, making decisions. All right. So in marketing, sometimes you build a team, sometimes you rent a team, right? You've started at a new portfolio company, right? You're going to be there for 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters, maybe, right? How do you decide which companies and which marketing departments should be building a team versus renting a team?
You mean they're
renting you, right? But that doesn't mean that everyone else needs to be rented, or anyone needs to be rented, or maybe everyone should be rented. Like, how do you decide on that mix between inside and outside people?
Yeah. One of my gigs, I was CMO for a sales outsourcing company. And so I'm familiar with the outsourcing space and how people use outsourcing and bring stuff in. And the way it's usually defined there is you keep what is core,
right?
What is strategic and core to your business. Generally, you build and you keep that internally. If something isn't core, but you need great expertise, and especially in some specialized things, maybe it's SEM, SEO,
Right.
maybe it's something else, you can outsource that. But if you outsource it, you have to manage it. So you have to have people that know it well enough to be able to manage it, so you know what you're getting from your vendors. But usually the way I bifurcate that is I say, okay, what's core to the business? What's really important that the business keeps an ongoing handle on and is one of their points of difference? You keep that internal generally, unless you don't have the capabilities now, but you
Right.
look to build that internally, and you'll outsource things that are either specialized or very, very detailed, that you may not want to build internally. You may not have the resources or the desire to build internally, but you want to get best in class
So
performance.
you've been CMO or interim CMO combined 11 times, right? In your experience, and maybe this is just completely company dependent, culture dependent. In your experience, are there certain sort of marketing specialties that are almost always outsiders? Or is that really
Well,
dependent on the
companies
company?
work with agencies, so I mean, you may
Yeah.
have some writing and brand
So
people
like ad
internally.
placement and stuff is almost
Yeah,
always
ad
outside.
placement, maybe SEM, SEO. It's not
Yeah.
always outside. I've seen them
No.
built internally too, but it's probably easier to get expertise outside, at least initially. Then you can decide if you want to build it in house or not.
Are there specialties that when you show up, typically marketing teams tend to be missing? Like they almost always need help in like this field or that field?
Maybe marketing or outside of marketing. I've seen a lot of companies that need help with how they measure the customer journey and
Right.
customer satisfaction, how they act on it. And sometimes it's easier to bring in an outside vendor to start that process, like me or others,
Right.
um, if they haven't built it internally, and then help them build it internally. That's one, which can be in marketing, it could be in customer operations, it can be in different parts of the business. Um, Generally, you have a PR firm that helps you get placements.
Mm-hmm.
You can also build that internally too, but in order to build it internally, you need people with PR experience, and generally people go to an agency first. You can do that with SEM and SEO, or search engine marketing, search engine optimization. You could start with an agency and then build it internally. It all depends what your resources are. And, another factor of whether you'd want to outsource something or build it internally, if you outsource something, and this includes a fractional or interim CMO, you're not building an internal overhead structure. So it keeps the flexibility. If you want to turn something on and turn something off, you
Right.
don't have benefits, you don't have bonus and all that. You can have more flexibility to pivot when you need to, when you outsource certain functions.
Right. Um, so a private equity company comes to you and they say, "Hey, we've bought this portfolio company," or they bought them in the last couple of years, usually, and they said, we think the products are great. We think the services are great. And their customers, it seems pretty solid, but they haven't grown. We want you to grow the company into new markets. Like, what's involved with that?
Um,
Are there any warning bells that go off when someone says that? Like they
well,
don't
I'd like to
understand
know.
how the complexity or trickiness of it, or
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to know what markets they've been successful at, what markets
sure,
they've been unsuccessful at. I'd like to know, have they defined an ideal customer profile, um, and the types of companies that will stick with them, types of prospects and customers that will stick with them once they acquire them. Um, but after figuring that out, if they want to expand to some white space, to new markets, um, something I like to do, it's one name for it is relative targeting. Um,
hmm
you need to have a strategic discussion. It needs to be aligned between marketing, sales, product, and the ELT. And that is, what segments do you go after? What segments are attractive to grow to? And to do that, generally, you need to look at two things. You need to look at the external attractiveness of the segment. Is it growing? Are there any tailwinds, like new regulations, regulatory or market forces or economic forces that would be tailwinds to are people spending money, how easy it is to reach the market. So you've got certain elements that tell you about the attractiveness of certain segments. But then you need to look at your internal capabilities to be successful. If we want to go after each of these segments we're considering, do we have the right product? Do we have the right price? Do we have the right sales channel? Do we have the right value proposition? Do we have the right, process? Do we have the list? Can we, discover who we want to target in the market? And why would they be in the ideal customer profile? If we start acquiring customers in this new segment, can we keep them? Can we retain them? What's going to be the lifetime value? And to do that, you need to figure some things out. And when you do that, when you understand external market attractiveness and internal capabilities to be successful, then you can say, okay, these segments are really, very attractive. They're growing fast, etc. Are we set up to be successful right now? If not, you want to build some capabilities before you put resources there. If you are set up, then invest there right now. Then there may be some other segments where the market isn't growing that much, but we're really well set up to be successful and you can farm the base. Or if the market isn't attractive and we're not, set up to be successful, you don't put any investment there. So you can take that analysis and create a 4-blocker, if you will,
right,
to prioritize what markets, the order of the segments you go after. And I know it's common sense, but a lot of companies don't do that. They go by gut and they say, oh, we think we'll do really well in these markets without going through that process, which I think is important from a strategic standpoint.
So overall, is when it comes to going, looking at and then entering a new market, is it telling the same story to new people or is it telling a new story to people?
That's hard to answer, Dean. It really depends. Are the requirements the same? Are the terms and nomenclature the same or different?
Is it common, do you think? Let me see if I can dial it in a bit. Is it common that a company says, hey, we don't just want to, be the preferred choice for aerospace, I'm totally making this up, aerospace engineers, but we also want to be the preferred choice, let's say they make software for mechanical engineers, like very different, right? And so we're going to have, you can either like come up with a new story to tell to aerospace engineers, to mechanical engineers, or you can like change the company's story. Like now we're not just the people for aerospace engineers, we're the preferred choice for engineers. How often, like 11 times now, how often has it been one or the other?
Yeah, I mean, you can have what I call nested campaigns where you change the nomenclature to the target audience. So, if you have a different lexicon of words that people will respond to because they're aerospacey or mechanically, I'm using that loosely. You want to use the language that they get. Now, do you change your overall brand because you've broadened who you market to? You could. You could have an aerial campaign that is consistent across those two segments without getting into the detail until you have your more specific segment-based campaigns. That could be, and that also depends on the personas that you're going to be targeting. If the engineers in both segments have common needs, but they use different language, that'll probably be easier to do. If their needs are totally different, then you're going to have probably different campaigns to target both of those. And you may or may not be able to adjust your overall brand to broaden it. So it really depends. I mean, you need to do some due diligence and to figure that out.
In a hypothetical situation where you had absolute control over how long you were going to serve as an interim CMO, right? You've got a picture in your head of what success looks like at this company. And while an interim CMO, by definition, is not going to be present at the very end, because these things can take years, right? But like definitely the stage has been built, the platform's there, right? How long is that engagement in a perfect ideal situation?
Generally,
Not 3 months, I'm guessing, because it sounds like you work with really big companies.
I do. And I may start for 3 months.
Yeah.
But generally, it always goes to at least 6 months. And let me give you an example. So I'll give you an example from FinThrive. So I was interim CMO at FinThrive for 6 months. Led the marketing team, was on the ELT, reported to the CEO. There was a change of CEOs also, which I knew was coming. And then they hired the full-time CMO. Coincidentally, the full-time CMO was one of my past clients from Serious Decisions and Forrester, so I knew her.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed on as her coach, mentor, and advisor for another 14 months.
Wow.
And then I started working with the chief customer officer to help them and his team implement Net Promoter Score 3.0 and become a lot more customer centric, which I knew was a need because they had acquired a couple companies and they really needed some help on how they interacted with customers and improve their customer scores. And as I said, we just came out a couple months ago with a case study on that. And in the revenue cycle management and the health IT space, there's an organization that's called KLAS, KLAS.
Right.
And they look at customer satisfaction from each of the vendors in the industry. And after we worked together and made changes, their class scores shot up, where they're number 1 or number 2 in each product area. So there's a real impact to, serving customers right. And if you listen to Fred Reichheld, who started NPS 20 years ago, he just wrote a book, which is great, called Winning on Purpose. And what he says is 90% of companies don't serve customers right. They pay lip service and they don't really listen. And the 10% that do, or about 10%, are a lot more successful. In fact, he's invested money in the stock market with those 10% and made a lot of money doing that.
That's a big split, right? 90-10.
Yeah.
Let's bring it to marketing for a second, right? What's the biggest thing most companies get wrong about marketing?
The biggest thing is that, well, a couple of things. Number one, marketing is a coin-operated demand engine, which it isn't. Number two, we can't invest in brand because it takes too long to pay off.
Right.
But if you don't invest in brand, that's going to impact demand. There's just a time lag. I've seen research from C-suites that what's the probability of someone being on your short list if you don't know who they are, if you don't know the brand. And they interviewed every C-suite member, and it's 95% they need to know the brand if they're going to consider a vendor on their short list. So there are huge relationships between brand and demand. So it's important to establish your brand, and not just awareness, but preference, association, and then also your customer satisfaction. If you don't do that, that's going to impact your demand numbers as well. So brand investments are very important, and over relying on some of the historical demand statistics like marketing qualified lead.
Right.
It's not how many leads, it's the quality of them. And oftentimes someone may be a good prospect, just not now. They're not ready yet. So timing, nurturing, and getting intent data so you know when people are in market, and not clearly identifying and following who your ideal customer profile is. If sales is just going for everybody, and you're putting customers on, you're meeting short-term targets, but you can't keep the customers you put on. They're not in your ideal customer profile. You're just churning and you're hurting your brand.
Yeah.
And churn can kill you. So, and the last thing I'll say is historically people have viewed marketing just on the front end to acquire new customers. It's a lot more than that. Customer marketing is very important, and developing advocates. And if you look at your net revenue retention and the advocates that are wowed on your brand, that bring you new business, and you add that together, that's your future financial results.
All right. I have a hypothetical, and I want you to finish the sentence that I'm going to give you. Okay.
Okay, I'll try.
All right, let's pretend that, and I am not, but let's pretend that I'm a fractional CMO or interim CMO, and I have a meeting with a company that I might be interested in working with, or they might be interested in. Right?
Yeah.
And I met with those guys. I spent half a day with those guys, and at the end of it, I told them, no amount of marketing is going to fix what's wrong with your company because finish that hypothetical.
Because you need to improve your alignment and service level agreements between marketing, sales, product, and finance. You guys need to get on this same page. And that starts at the C-suite and the board. And you need to have an aligned strategy and annual plan so you all move in the same direction. And you need to decide what not to do as part of your strategy.
All right. Another hypothetical. I work for a private equity company. I don't, but my manager is one of those, if I give people incredible challenges, they'll rise to the occasion. So my manager's directive to me is we want to find and interview a handful of really potentially outstanding interim CMOs and come back to me with like the 2 or 3 questions that you're going to ask that's going to weed out everybody except the very best. What are those 2 or 3 questions that I should be asking these candidates before I pass them along to my boss?
Well, how many times have you been a full-time CMO? How many times have you been an interim CMO?
Right.
How many private equity portfolio companies have you worked with? And what's your sweet spot? Are you a demand person, a brand, customer-led growth, all 3? How do you focus, and how do you work with companies to help them mitigate the challenges that private equity investors normally see with portfolio companies? Mm-hmm. And tell me where you've done that and what the stories are.
All right, another hypothetical. Someone says, hey, Alan, I came across you on LinkedIn or something. I've just gotten hired to be an interim CMO. First time at a PE-owned company. Got any advice for me?
Be careful how you set expectations.
Yeah.
And spend the time to learn their environment, their positives and gaps, and make sure you write an engagement that's at least 3 months long, because it's going to take you some time to learn and become them, and develop relationships. And don't make any assumptions up front about what you know and what they don't know. Figure out, where their strengths are, where their gaps are, and develop relationships so you can be most helpful to them.
Okay. Finish this sentence for me then. You're still talking to the same person, okay? So the thing you're going to be most surprised about being an interim CMO at a private equity-owned company is
some of the basic problems that they have.
Yeah.
Brand, demand, churn, the way customers view them, MarTech stack, just a whole series of problems that need to be fixed, even though the company is a lot bigger than some of maybe the smaller companies you're used to.
And then let's
need a lot of help.
Well, I mean, that would sort of make sense. I think that answer you just gave, right? Because in most cases, that company was probably, I think, I've never worked in private equity, but other investors and stuff, they buy companies for one of two existing companies for one of two reasons. Either they think that the company is going to do fantastic, and all they need is a big infusion of cash, right? To like expand, or they think that there's a missed opportunity because the company is broken in some way that they can fix.
Yeah.
So they pick it up at a discount and then they fix that part, and now they have a great working machine.
Yeah. Usually private equity investors have what they call a value creation plan.
Yeah.
And they are there to help companies be successful, grow them, and then at some point, maybe, I don't know, 5-6 years or whatever the time frame is, sell them or help them go public.
Yeah. Okay.
They provide a great service to the market.
Let's wind this down. Looking back on your various experiences at 11 plus companies. Let's say, I think you're at one right now. So 10 prior ones plus, was there anything you wish you could have done over or differently in those jobs, those engagements? Or something you wish you'd known at the time?
Yeah, I think earlier in my career with some full-time CMO roles, I probably, and I've developed this as I've had more experience, I could have maybe listened more and slowed myself down.
Right.
Versus coming on and trying to fix too many things too quickly. That was earlier in my career, but it's something where I've developed over time. And I think you do that with experience. Right. Probably that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's all. I asked you a ton of questions there. So we went way over the normal time, but that's okay. Awesome. Thanks again.
Thanks, Dean.
All right.